Hello, and welcome to another edition of Todd Talk, where we take teaching theory and turn it into teaching practice. In keeping with our theme for this month of 21st century skills, we'll be taking a look at creativity. 21st century skills are skills that transcend the classroom. They're not just used in the classroom, they're used in students' real lives, they're used in the future, and any jobs, any relationships they're going to have. So these are skills that they can learn these successfully, they will be able to navigate anything that they come across because they'll have these skills. Creativity is a big one of this because creativity is not something that we purposely teach in classrooms very much. We do things that require creativity, or we do things that might involve some creativity, but we're not blatantly teaching creativity. And yet, when you get out into the workplace, there's businesses in a lot of cases will be expecting people to be creative in what they come up with and what they devise and what they develop. And so knowing how to foster creativity in the classroom is something that can be very valuable as a teacher. So what does it mean to be creative, first off? So there are several different definitions of creative, and one is not necessarily right. There's no one universal definition. But one thing to keep in mind is that creativity is not just the artistic aspect. So a lot of people think creativity and they think they're a good drawer or they're good at art or whatever. Creativity has to do with the thinking that you do. How creative are you with your thinking? And sometimes this manifests itself through artwork. Sometimes it manifests itself through writing. Sometimes it manifests itself through a product that you have come up that others have not thought about. So to teach creativity is requiring students to think differently than people maybe normally would think. So to not take the most obvious answer, but to come up with an answer that maybe others have not thought about or looking at it in a different way. This is what the general idea of creativity is, and what you should be looking at in your classroom is providing opportunities for students to tap into this creative thinking skill. So here is a creativity quiz developed by the faculty at Northwest School of Business. You see the address here. I would invite you to go onto this website and to take this test to see just how creative you are. Creativity is also one of those things that when we self-assess ourselves, sometimes we're not necessarily accurate. So we might consider ourselves to be very creative person, but in actuality, we're not as creative as we thought, or vice versa. We might not think ourselves as being creative, but in actuality, we think very differently and we are very creative. So this is just an awareness, creating awareness in how creative you are as a person. And so this is a free test, doesn't cost a thing. It's for adult learners, but it can help you just get more metacognition of how creative you are, because teaching creative thinking does involve a bit of creativity. So as the teacher, you have to be creative in your lessons that you come up with, the products that you allow students to do, lessons that you're teaching them. So how creative are your lessons? So how can you serve creative thinkers, or how can you help someone who is a creative thinker in your classroom? So there's numerous things you might try. One strategy is reversing the question answer paradigm. So basically, instead of asking questions to which there's a correct answer, you ask students to create the problem. So Model United Nations is one I think that does this very nicely. So you pick a country and you find a problem that exists in that country. And then you have to come up with the answer to that problem. So students are not only generating the solution, they're generating the problem as well. So some examples I've given here is, how can we grow vegetables without using pesticides? So that would be a question that a student might come up with, and then they try to develop answers that will help them to do that. Or how can we feed the world's population in a sustainable way? You notice that these are like problem-based learning questions where you're challenging students to think about a bigger problem than just maybe a math problem, or how to conjugate a verb, or how to translate something from a language. You're asking them to be creative with what they come up with, and creative solutions are what make the world go round. So Apple is a perfect example of creative solutions to common things. So they came up with lots of different solutions that others had not thought of, and so they were very innovative as a result. A second strategy you can use is what's called inquiry-based feedback. So in this, you ask students to, instead of doing their likes and dislikes, you ask them to give feedback in the form of "I've noticed that," or why they think this way and how. But you have students give each other this type of feedback, and that you're kind of probing to ask more questions. So if a student brings up something, another student is going to ask why, or they're going to ask how, or they're going to say, "What made you come up with that?" They're going to keep pushing the inquiry a little bit deeper to where you're getting, not just a surface level answer, but you're getting something that's a lot more in depth. And teaching students to ask these questions of one another, and of you for that matter, are a good way for creative thinkers. So, you may run across that student who asks a lot of questions in your class, and it can be annoying at times, certainly. But what we sometimes are failing to notice is this student is a creative thinker that just is inquisitive and wants to think about different possibilities. And so, why can't you explore some of those possibilities? Why can't you do that? The third one is encouraging students to take risks. Especially with their creativity. So, the saying is go big or go home. But a lot of times in classrooms, we actually dissuade kids from going big. We want them to take the safe way. We want them to be compliant. We want them to make sure they get their work in on time, and they want it to be orderly, rather than having students take risks and be creative. But when you look at like some of the most creative minds out there, they all took risks, whether it's Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg, or Vincent van Gogh or Albert Einstein. These guys all, and Madame Curie, and they're all of these people took risks and were very creative with the way that they took their risks. And so having assignments that allow kids to fail and yet not be punished for that is very valuable. This will encourage them to take risk, and it will encourage them to use their creativity to try to come up with something that maybe not is the most obvious response to a question or a response to a prompt, but they're going to think outside. And so what you're going to get is really interesting responses or really interesting products as a result. And that's what we want to encourage kids. I mean, you put that kid out in the real world, in the workplace, and they're coming up with creative solutions to problems that their work is coming up with, and that person is going to be extremely valuable. The fourth is using art strategies. So I know I said that art is not necessarily, creativity is not necessarily art, but art is definitely one way that you can express creativity. And myself, I am not an artistic person, but I think pretty creatively. And so when it comes to artwork, it may not look pretty, but I'm definitely going to look at it a different way. So one way to do that is what's a collage. And this is to take different images and put them together and make connections between these seemingly unrelated objects. So this is a great one in that it allows them to make connections to maybe things like words or numbers or scientific elements. But what you're doing is you're putting these random ideas on this board, and then you're asking the students to come up with creative, connections. And the interesting thing is that one student may have a connection this way, and another student might see it as this way. And so there are different ways that you can do this. Second art strategy that you can consider is what's called a pareidolia. And this is when you look at an object and find something that's not really there. So the perfect example of this is you look at the clouds. And clouds are clouds. They're not really, no one is creating clouds or making clouds into shapes, but our minds often will find shapes within the clouds, whether it be an elephant or a bird or whatever. But you can do this in the classroom as well. You can ask them to reinterpret a character's mood. So, for instance, if you look at a literary character, is there a backstory that they can come up with, that maybe justifies the way that they acted? Things of that nature. You can use this in math, when you're asking them to make something out of something that seemingly doesn't make any sense, or something that's not there, but they can connect that to some other form of math, or some math that they're going to use in their own life. So using art strategies are a really good way to foster creativity in the classroom. And it doesn't just have to be an art class. Sometimes it can be a drawing, but again, you have to be careful in that when a student is doing a drawing, are they truly learning from that drawing? Or are they just learning how to draw? You want to access the thinking aspect of their mind. So it's not that they're just drawing this or painting this or whatever, but they are thinking creatively. They're doing something different or something that's not the norm. A fifth strategy, and one of my favorite, is open-ended tasks. So I do this a lot on my project-based learning, where students are given an open-ended task that has no clear-cut, definitive answer. And then you ask them to come up with solutions. And the really interesting thing about this is that you are going to get so many different possible answers that you're going to have lots of things to talk about, and people will learn from one another, and people will think about things differently. But these open-ended tasks are really good because it doesn't have a ceiling. It allows kids to go as far as they want to go and explore as much as they want to do. So this is a nice, deep, rich activity to foster creativity, because if a student, comes up with a solution immediately, you might want to push back. Is that your best solution? Can you think of a more creative solution? I do destination imagination with a lot of my students, and I like destination imagination because the tasks are very open-ended, so kids can interpret it in lots of different ways, and then they have to use their creativity to show what their solution was and how they came up with that. And so open-ended tasks are a great way in your classroom that you can do this. And it doesn't have to be a large project. It can be like a problem of the day, where you ask them about something, to think about something that's open-ended. So you could put on the board, how would you solve hunger in our city? And have them ponder that and have them think about that and come up with creative solutions for that. So you can use the creative problem-solving process in your class. This is a structure that you can use. And there are basically 6 stages to the creative problem-solving process. But if you take an assignment and kind of run it through this, then you can pretty much guarantee that by the end, the students have had to tap into their creativity. So you can see, you give them an objective. And oftentimes it can be very messy. Again, open-ended, it's not clear-cut. And you challenge them to try to find a solution to this. So then the second step is that students are fact-finding. So they may be doing research, they may be doing interviews, they might be doing other things to collect data that is going to go towards a solution to this problem. So the third aspect of this is problem-solving, where they examine lots of different possibilities for how to solve this problem. So there's not just one, but they're brainstorming all sorts of possibilities. The fourth one is idea finding. So once you have taken these problems and you have maybe hundreds of these or dozens of these, you try to boil it down into an idea that is actually both plausible and creative. So, kids can be, sometimes their creativity cannot be realistic. So I have students that will say when they're doing invention convention, they want to have an invention where you drink a potion, you're able to fly. Well, we don't have that, that technology right now or that ability right now. So, we go back to the problem and what problem are they trying to solve? If it's flying, then maybe there's some other method or other solution to come up with a way for us to be able to fly. The fifth one is solution finding. And this is narrowing it down to the single solution that you feel is best going to answer this solution or this problem. And so this is going to mean having to defend yourself. And explain why you chose the answer that you did and why you think this, and justifying why this one is the best. So again, now you're accessing those higher level order thinking skills of evaluation, where you're having to actually make a defense for the solution that you came up with. And then the sixth step is basically acceptance finding, which means what is your plan for putting this into action? So if someone were to replicate your solution, how would they go about doing that? You need to make it clear cut is, these are steps you might go through in order to get to this solution. And these are things that you could do. But what this process does is it allows for creativity while at the same time giving a structure and allowing students to be able to use their creativity, but at the same time having to focus it into something that could be very usable.